Captain Felix's mission to the remote planet of Vera was routine, or so he'd thought. For years, the Galactic Council had strictly contained Kelor, a massive, fearsome alien dragon whose reputation was a mix of legend and nightmare. Kelor's scales were as hard as star steel, his eyes a fierce amber that seemed to pierce any soul foolish enough to meet his gaze. He had been captured after a fierce battle with Council forces years ago, and his power made him the Council's most feared and closely guarded prisoner. Stationed on Vera, Felix's task was to oversee the containment facility and ensure that Kelor remained securely held. Every officer knew the risks associated with Kelor. His fiery breath could melt durasteel, and his sheer size and strength could easily topple a building. The Council's strictest orders had left no room for misinterpretation. Kelor was not to be interacted with beyond basic maintenance. One stormy afternoon, Felix was making his rounds through the compound, passing by Kelor's enclosure. The creature's growls echoed ominously in the cavernous chamber, a reminder of the raw, untamed power within those walls. But something strange caught Felix's eye on the surveillance feed, a tiny blip that wasn't supposed to be there, just outside the containment zone. His heart skipped a beat as he zoomed in on the feed. There, inside the high-security perimeter, stood a young girl. Felix blinked, wondering if the footage was a mistake, but as he adjusted the camera, the reality became undeniable. She was indeed standing inside the enclosure, and what was even more shocking was her lack of fear. She was leaning against the containment barrier, a look of calm on her face as she gazed up at Kelor, who was watching her with a curious but uncharacteristically gentle gaze. Felix moved swiftly, entering the control room and preparing to activate the emergency override to close off the containment area. Yet as he watched the screen, he felt a strange hesitation. The girl was smiling, her expression completely devoid of fear. In fact, she seemed to be talking to Kelor, her lips moving in a quiet rhythm that the cameras couldn't capture. And Kelor, the most deadly and ferocious creature the galaxy had ever known, was listening. Felix's shock grew as he observed the interaction. Kelor's usual hostile stance had softened, his posture relaxed as he regarded the young girl. It was as if the dragon's ferocity had been pacified, replaced by a calm curiosity. This was impossible. Every council record described Kelor as a creature of unmatched aggression, one who had attacked anything that entered his vicinity, regardless of size or species. Driven by equal parts concern and fascination, Felix left the control room and hurried to the containment zone. The council would never allow a civilian, especially a young girl, to be near Kelor, and he knew he had to intervene before disaster struck. As he approached the thick glass barrier separating him from the girl and the dragon, Felix saw her more clearly. She couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, with dark hair tied back and a determined expression that belied her age. "Hey!" Felix called out, trying to sound firm but not alarmed. "What are you doing here? This area is restricted." The girl turned around, blinking in surprise. Her gaze was sharp, assessing him before she gave a small, defiant smile. "I'm just talking to him. He's not as bad as everyone says." Felix stared at her in disbelief. "Do you know who that is?" "That's Kelor, the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. You need to step away from him right now." But the girl shook her head, unfazed. "He's not dangerous to me. He's lonely." She turned back to Kelor, who rumbled softly, his massive head lowering to her level, his eyes focused on her with an intensity that made Felix's blood run cold. The girl placed a gentle hand on the barrier, as if reaching out to Kelor, and to Felix's astonishment, Kelor mimicked her, pressing a clawed paw against the glass, aligning it with her hand. The sight was surreal, like a scene from a dream. Felix had seen Kelor rend metal and break bones with those same claws, yet here he was, pressing gently against the glass, a creature of terror displaying an almost tender reverence. "What's your name?" Felix asked, his voice softer now, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. The girl turned back to him, her eyes alight with quiet confidence. "I'm Lena. I heard about Kelor from some people in town, and I wanted to see him for myself." Everyone talks about how scary he is, but I don't see it that way. Felix was at a loss for words. You don't understand. Kelor has caused more destruction than you could imagine. He's not some misunderstood creature, he's dangerous. Lena tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. Maybe he was dangerous because everyone treated him that way. But look at him now. He doesn't seem like a monster to me. Felix looked back at Kelor, the dragon's intense gaze meeting his own. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized Lena might be right. Kelor's expression was devoid of the usual aggression Felix had come to expect. Instead, there was an awareness, a calm acceptance, as if he were choosing not to harm the girl who had come to visit him. But as incredible as the scene was, Felix knew the council would not tolerate such an interaction. Kelor was seen as an asset, one of raw power and destruction, and allowing a human, especially a child, to befriend him would defy every protocol in place. Lena, Felix said slowly, the council won't allow this. They see Kelor as a threat, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep him under control. Lena glanced at him, a flash of defiance in her eyes. Then maybe they're the ones who need to change how they see him. Felix couldn't help but feel a strange respect for the girl's bravery and conviction. Her presence had clearly made an impact on Kelor, and in turn, it was beginning to change something within Felix himself. Yet he knew that if word got out, the council would take drastic measures. Listen, he said, his tone serious, if you want to keep seeing him, you'll need to be careful. If the council finds out, they'll double down on Kelor's containment. They may even take extreme measures to prevent any attachment. Lena nodded, a determined look in her eyes. I'll be careful. But I won't stop coming here. He deserves a friend. As Felix watched her turn back to the dragon, a spark of rebellion ignited in his own heart. For years, he had followed the council's orders without question, but Lena's friendship with Kelor was challenging everything he believed. Perhaps, just perhaps, Kelor was more than the monster the council had made him out to be. Leaving Lena and Kelor in their silent understanding, Felix returned to his control room, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. He knew one thing for sure, this strange friendship between a human girl and the galaxy's deadliest dragon was going to change everything. And deep down, he felt a stir of excitement, and maybe even hope, that he hadn't felt in years. The council's wrath. The next morning, Felix's peace was shattered. News of Lena's breach into Kelor's containment had somehow reached the Galactic Council, sparking a furious response. Felix received an urgent message, and as he opened the holocom, the image of Envoy Lerith, one of the council's senior officials, flickered into view. Her expression was a mix of shock and outrage. Captain Felix, Lerith's voice was icy, her eyes narrowed. Is it true that a human girl managed to infiltrate the containment zone and engage with Kelor? Felix kept his face neutral, his mind racing. Yes, Envoy. She managed to bypass security, but I handled it. She was removed from the vicinity shortly after. Lerith's eyes flashed with anger. You handled it? This is beyond unacceptable. The Council's directive regarding Kelor is clear, no interaction, no exceptions. That creature is a threat to every system within 100 light-years. Felix swallowed, choosing his words carefully. With respect, Envoy, the situation was contained without incident. The girl showed no signs of harm, and Kelor remained contained. Lerith's voice rose dangerously. Captain, you clearly don't understand the gravity of this situation. We're dispatching a full security team to Vera immediately. Enhanced containment protocols will be implemented, and that girl will be questioned thoroughly. Felix felt his stomach drop. Envoy, surely that's unnecessary. The breach was isolated, and I can ensure it won't happen again. Your assurances mean nothing now, Captain. We have reports that the girl wasn't just near Kelor, she was interacting with him peacefully. Do you understand what this implies? If word gets out that the galaxy's most dangerous predator can be tamed by a child, it undermines everything we've built. The fear, the respect for council authority, it all crumbles. Felix realized with growing horror that the council's concern wasn't just about security, it was about control. Kelor's terrifying reputation served their purposes, and Lena's friendship threatened that narrative. The girl, Captain, what's her name? I didn't get her full details, Envoy. She was just a local child who wandered in. Laritha's expression turned predatory. Find her. Find her family. We need to understand how she managed to approach Kelor without being attacked. There may be something unique about her that could be useful to our research. Felix's blood ran cold. The way Larith said useful made it clear that Lena would not be treated as a person but as a test subject. Envoy, she's just a child. Surely. She's a security breach with potentially valuable biological markers. The council will decide her fate. You have 48 hours before our team arrives. Ensure both Kelor and the girl are secured. That's an order, Captain. The connection ended abruptly, leaving Felix staring at the blank screen. His hands trembled slightly as the weight of the situation settled on him. The council wasn't just planning to contain Lena, they were planning to study her, to use her somehow in their research on Kelor. That evening, Felix found himself walking toward Kelor's containment zone. As he approached, he wasn't surprised to see a familiar small figure pressed against the glass barrier. Lena had returned, and she was speaking softly to Kelor, who was lying down, his massive head close to the glass. Lena, Felix called out gently, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and her face brightened when she saw him. Captain Felix. Kelor was just telling me about the stars. Well, not telling exactly, but I can feel what he's thinking somehow. The escape. Felix spent the next day meticulously planning their escape. He knew the facility's security systems better than anyone, but breaking out the galaxy's most feared prisoner was far beyond a simple security breach. It would require perfect timing, inside knowledge, and more than a little luck. In the depths of the night, Felix made his way to Kelor's containment area carrying a modified data pad and some specialized equipment he'd borrowed from the engineering bay. Lena was already there, as he'd expected, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her hand pressed against the glass barrier. He knows, she said without turning around. He knows what we're planning. Felix knelt beside her, studying the massive dragon on the other side of the barrier. Kelor's eyes were alert, intelligent, and there was something unsettling about the way he seemed to be watching Felix's every movement. Can he really understand us? Felix asked. He understands everything, Lena said simply. He's been listening to the guards for years, learning your language, your technology. The council thinks he's just an animal, but he's been watching, waiting, planning. Felix felt a chill run down his spine. If Kelor was truly that intelligent, it changed everything about their situation, and made the council's treatment of him even more horrific. Lena, what I'm about to do, it can't be undone. Once we free Kelor, the council will hunt us across the galaxy. Are you sure this is what you want? She turned to face him, her young face set with determination. Yes. He's not a monster, Captain Felix. The council made him into one by treating him like one. But with me, he remembers what it feels like to be gentle. Felix nodded and began connecting his equipment to the containment system's control panel. The security grid was incredibly complex, designed with multiple failsafes and alarms. But Felix had been studying these systems for years, and he'd found weaknesses, small gaps in the programming that he could exploit. This will take about an hour, he whispered to Lena. Once I start, there's no stopping. The moment the containment field drops, every alarm in the facility will sound. We'll have maybe 10 minutes before the backup power activates and the emergency protocols lock down the entire planet. What about after we escape? Where will we go? Felix had been wrestling with that question himself. There are uncharted systems in the Outer Rim. Places the council doesn't patrol regularly. If we can get there, we might be able to find somewhere for Kelor to live freely. Lena smiled, placing her hand back on the glass. Did you hear that, Kelor? We're taking you home. The dragon's response was immediate, a low, melodic sound that seemed almost like purring. Felix had never heard Kelor make such a gentle noise, and it reinforced his growing belief that maybe, just maybe, they were doing the right thing. As Felix worked, his fingers flying over the control systems, he felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. He was betraying everything he'd sworn to uphold, abandoning his duty to the council, and potentially putting countless lives at risk. But every time he looked at Lena and Kelor together, he knew he couldn't stand by and watch as they were separated and studied like laboratory specimens. Almost ready, he murmured, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Lena, when this field drops, Kelor needs to understand that he can't attack anyone. If he hurts even one person during our escape, the council will use it as justification for even harsher measures against his kind. He won't hurt anyone, Lena said confidently. He's only violent when he's scared or threatened. Right now, he's hopeful. Felix made the final connections and paused, his hand hovering over the activation switch. This is it. Once I flip this switch, there's no going back. Lena stood up and stepped back from the glass. Kelor's ready. Are you? Felix took a deep breath and flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like thunder, the containment field collapsed. The massive energy barrier that had held Kelor for years simply vanished, and suddenly there was nothing between them and the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. Alarms immediately began blaring throughout the facility. Red warning lights bathed everything in an ominous glow, and Felix could hear the sound of boots running in distant corridors as the night shift responded to the emergency. Kelor rose to his full height, his massive form towering over them. For a terrifying moment, Felix wondered if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. The dragon's eyes glowed like amber suns in the dim light, and the sheer power radiating from his form was overwhelming. But then Lena stepped forward, completely unafraid, and reached out her hand. Hello, Kelor. I'm so glad to finally meet you properly. The massive dragon lowered his head until it was level with Lena's. Gently, carefully, he pressed his snout against her outstretched hand. The gesture was so tender, so unlike everything Felix had been told about Kelor, that he felt tears sting his eyes. We need to go, Felix said urgently. The transport bay is 2 levels up. Can Kelor fly in the facility? Lena looked up at the dragon, and for a moment, they seemed to communicate without words. He can, but he's been grounded for so long, his wings are weak. We'll need to take the service tunnels. Felix had planned for this possibility. I know a route. Follow me, and stay quiet. The corridors will be crawling with guards in minutes. As they moved through the facility, Felix was amazed by how silently Kelor could move despite his massive size. The dragon seemed to glide through the hallways, his claws barely clicking on the metal floors. Lena stayed close to his side, one hand always touching his scales, as if maintaining their connection. They were halfway to the transport bay when they encountered their first patrol. Felix motioned for them to freeze as he heard voices echoing around the corner ahead. The containment breach is on level 7, one guard was saying. Command wants full patrols on every floor. That thing could be anywhere. How the hell did the containment field fail? Another voice asked. Those systems are supposed to be fail-safe. Felix felt his heart racing. They needed to find another route, but time was running out. In the distance, he could hear more alarm systems activating, the backup containment protocols were coming online. Suddenly, Kelor moved past them, his massive form disappearing around the corner toward the guards. Felix felt his blood turn to ice, convinced that their plan had just gone horribly wrong. But instead of screams or weapon fire, he heard only surprised shouts and the sound of running feet growing fainter. After a moment, Kelor returned, and Lena smiled. He didn't hurt them, she explained. He just encouraged them to run away very fast. Felix shook his head in amazement. Even in freedom, even when threatened, Kelor was showing the restraint that Lena had promised he would. It was more evidence that the monster the council had described was largely their own creation. They reached the transport bay without further incident, though Felix could hear search teams getting closer. The hangar held several ships, but only one was large enough and powerful enough for their purposes, a heavy cargo transport that the council used for moving equipment to and from Vera. "Can you fly one of these?" Lena asked as they approached the ship. "I can try," Felix replied, running toward the pilot's access ramp. "But Kelor will have to fit in the cargo hold. It'll be tight." To Felix's surprise, the dragon was already examining the ship, his intelligent eyes taking in every detail. When Lena approached him, he seemed to nod in understanding. "He knows about ships," Lena explained. "He's seen them come and go for years. He understands what we need to do." As Kelor squeezed himself into the cargo hold, a space that was barely large enough to contain him, Felix powered up the ship systems. The main hangar doors were sealed, but he had override codes that should still work. The engines came online with a roar that echoed through the hangar, and Felix could see guards beginning to pour into the bay. Some were raising weapons, but their shots went wide as Felix lifted the ship off the ground and angled it toward the sealed doors. "Hold on," he shouted back to Lena and Kelor as he punched in the override codes. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with agonizing slowness, the massive doors began to open. The moment the gap was wide enough, Felix pushed the throttles to maximum and shot the ship through the opening into the stormy night sky of Vera. Behind them, the facility grew smaller and smaller until it was just a collection of lights in the darkness. They had done it. They had actually freed the galaxy's most feared prisoner, and they were alive. But as Felix set course for the outer system, he knew their real journey was just beginning. Somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of space, they would need to find a place where a dragon, a girl, and a rogue captain could build a new life together. And behind them, he knew, the full might of the Galactic Council would soon be in pursuit. Showing them his true power, Lena replied. Kelor's people could manipulate energy itself through sound. It's not destruction, it's harmony. He's teaching their machines to understand peace. One by one, the council ships fell silent as Kelor moved between them, his song growing stronger and more complex. Felix watched the tactical display in amazement as weapon systems across the entire fleet went offline, not damaged but somehow, pacified. But Envoy Lareth was not finished. From the command dreadnought came a new weapon, one that Felix recognized with growing horror. The ship's experimental quantum disruptor was powering up, a device designed to tear apart matter at the subatomic level. Kelor! Lena shouted, though she knew he couldn't hear her across the vacuum. But somehow, the dragon sensed the danger. The massive weapon fired, sending a beam of destructive energy toward Kelor. For a moment, it seemed as though the dragon would be utterly destroyed. But instead of dodging, Kelor spread his wings wide and sang louder than ever before. The quantum beam struck him directly, and something impossible happened. The destructive energy wrapped around Kelor like a cloak, absorbed and transformed by his song. His scales began to glow with brilliant light, and when he sang again, the sound carried waves of pure energy that rippled outward through space. The waves reached the council fleet, and instead of destroying the ships, they did something far more profound. Every person aboard those vessels suddenly felt what Kelor felt, the loneliness of centuries in captivity, the pain of being misunderstood, the desperate hope for connection and freedom. Felix felt it too, the emotional resonance washing over him like a tide. He understood, in that moment, not just Kelor's suffering, but his capacity for forgiveness. Despite everything the council had done to him, the dragon bore no hatred, only a desire to be free and to protect those who showed him kindness. On the command ship, Envoy Lareth staggered back from her console, tears streaming down her face. Around her, Council officers were removing their helmets, their weapons forgotten as they experienced Kelor's truth. "Stand down," Lareth whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, louder, "All ships, stand down. Cease fire immediately." Kelor's song gradually faded, and he hung motionless in space, his scales still glowing with residual energy. Slowly, majestically, he flew back toward the asteroid where Felix and Lena waited. When he landed, the silence was profound. Even the ship's system seemed to hum more quietly, as if affected by the dragon's presence. "What happens now?" Felix asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Before anyone could answer, the communication system activated again. This time, it wasn't Envoy Lareth who appeared on the screen, but an elderly woman Felix recognized as Grand Chancellor Tyvan, the highest authority in the Galactic Council. "Kelor of the Star Singers," the Chancellor said, using a title that Felix had never heard before, "I speak for the Galactic Council in offering our deepest apologies. We were wrong. Gravely, profoundly wrong." Kelor inclined his massive head slightly. "Apologies are a beginning, Chancellor. But words alone cannot undo years of imprisonment." "No, they cannot," the Chancellor agreed. "But perhaps actions can begin to make amends. The Council hereby grants you and your companions full pardons for your escape. More than that, we offer you a place of honor in our society, if you will have it." Lena stepped forward, her hand still resting on Kelor's side. "He doesn't want a place in your society. He wants freedom. Real freedom." The Chancellor nodded gravely. "Then he shall have it. We formally recognize the Star Singer people as a sovereign species, with all rights and protections that entails. Kelor, you are free to go wherever you choose, to live as you see fit." Kelor was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. When he spoke, his voice was warm with something that might have been gratitude. "Freedom is indeed what I desire," he said. "But I have learned that freedom shared is sweeter than freedom alone. I choose to remain with these two, who saw me not as a monster, but as a being worthy of friendship." Felix felt a surge of emotion, pride, relief, and something deeper. They had done more than just free a prisoner, they had helped right a fundamental wrong. "There is one more thing," Kelor continued, turning to look at Lena. "The young one has a gift, she can sense the true nature of beings, see past fear and prejudice to what lies beneath. The galaxy needs such vision." Lena blushed, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I just saw you for who you really are. And that," Kelor said gently, "is the rarest gift of all. A new dawn." 6 months later, Felix stood on the observation deck of the newly established Haven Station, watching as Kelor soared through the rings of the gas giant they orbited. The dragon's scales caught the light of the twin suns, creating ripples of gold and amber that were breathtaking to behold. Haven Station had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a neutral territory where beings from across the galaxy could come to resolve conflicts peacefully. Kelor's demonstration of his true nature had sparked a revolution in thinking throughout the Council territories, and Haven was the result. "He looks happy," Lena said, joining Felix at the viewport. She had grown taller in the months since their escape, but her eyes still held that same wisdom and compassion that had first seen through to Kelor's true nature. "We all do," Felix replied, watching as a group of young aliens, refugees from various conflicts, played in the station's gardens below. When they had first arrived, they had been afraid of everything and everyone. Now, with Lena's guidance and Kelor's gentle presence, they were learning to trust again. "The Council delegation arrives tomorrow," Lena said. "Are you nervous?" Felix considered the question. Tomorrow would mark the official establishment of the Star Singer Accords, a treaty recognizing the rights of all intelligent species to freedom and self-determination. It was unprecedented, and it had only come about because of what Kelor had shown them in that moment of shared consciousness. "A little," he admitted. "But Kelor says that nervousness is just excitement wearing a disguise." Lena laughed, a sound that never failed to lift Felix's spirits. In the distance, Kelor completed a graceful loop through the atmosphere and began flying back toward the station. As the dragon approached, Felix could see that he wasn't alone. Two smaller forms flew beside him, young star singers who had emerged from hiding after news of Kelor's freedom had spread across the galaxy. The council had spent so long hunting Kelor that they had assumed he was the last of his kind, but the star singers were survivors, and hope had called them home. "They're getting faster," Lena observed, watching the young dragons practice their aerial maneuvers. "Everything grows stronger in freedom," came a familiar voice behind them. They turned to see Kelor entering the observation deck, his massive form somehow moving with perfect grace in the station's corridors. The architects who had designed Haven had taken his size into account, making it the first truly inclusive space station in the galaxy. "How was the flight?" Felix asked. "Educational," Kelor replied, settling down so that his great head was level with theirs. "Vex and Lyra are quick learners, but they still have much to discover about their heritage. The Council's persecution forced our people into hiding for so long that much knowledge was lost. But not forgotten," Lena said, reaching out to touch Kelor's snout. "And now you have time to remember together." Kelor's eyes glowed warmly. "Indeed. And we have allies now, friends who see us as we truly are." Felix smiled, remembering how terrified he had once been of this gentle giant. The galaxy's most dangerous predator had become one of its greatest advocates for peace, and his story had inspired countless others to look beyond fear and prejudice. "Captain Felix to the bridge, please," came an announcement over the station's communication system. "We have incoming vessels." Felix frowned. The council delegation wasn't due until tomorrow. "I should check on that." They made their way to the station's command center, where the duty officer greeted them with excitement rather than concern. "Captain, you need to see this," the officer said, gesturing to the main view screen. "We've got ships arriving from all over the galaxy. Not just council vessels, independent colonies, free traders, even some groups we've never seen before." Felix stared at the display in amazement. Dozens of ships of various sizes and configurations were arriving in system, more than they had expected for the treaty signing. "They're all requesting permission to attend the ceremony," the officer continued. "It seems word has spread about what we're doing here." Lena stepped up to the communications console. "Let them come," she said simply. "This isn't just about the council and the star singers anymore. It's about everyone." Over the next several hours, Haven Station buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy gathered to witness the historic signing. Felix found himself hosting delegates from species he had never encountered, each with their own stories of persecution, misunderstanding, or conflict. There were the crystalline prism people, who communicated through light patterns and had been dismissed as non-sentient decorations. The gaseous cloud dancers, who had been nearly driven to extinction because their homeworld had been classified as unoccupied. Dozens of others, all drawn by the promise of a new approach to interspecies relations. As evening approached, the main ceremony hall filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds. Felix stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd, still amazed by what they had accomplished. 6 months ago, he began, I was a simple prison guard, doing my duty to contain what I believed was a monster. Today, I stand before you as proof that understanding can triumph over fear, that connection can overcome prejudice. He gestured to where Kelor sat among the delegates, no longer a prisoner but an honored guest. Kelor of the Star Singers was never the monster we believed him to be. He was a being in pain, separated from his people, treated as a weapon rather than a person. It took the courage of a young girl to see past our misconceptions. Lena, seated beside Kelor, blushed as the audience applauded. She had become something of a legend herself, the child who had tamed a dragon simply by offering friendship. Grand Chancellor Tyvan stepped forward, carrying the ornate treaty document. The Star Singer Accords represent more than just an agreement between governments, she announced. They represent a commitment to seeing beyond our differences, to recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all sentient beings. As the Chancellor and Kelor placed their marks on the treaty, a hush fell over the assembly. This moment would be remembered throughout galactic history as the turning point, the day when the galaxy chose understanding over fear. But the most magical moment came afterward, as delegates from hundreds of worlds mingled in the station's great hall. Felix watched as barriers, linguistic, cultural, biological, dissolved in the face of genuine curiosity and mutual respect. In the center of it all, Kelor moved among the guests like a massive, gentle host. Young beings from a dozen species climbed on his back and rode his broad shoulders, while their parents spoke with other delegates about trade agreements and cultural exchanges. "You did it," Lena said, appearing beside Felix with 2 cups of warm stellar spice tea. "You helped change the galaxy." Felix shook his head, watching as Kelor carefully lowered his head so a tiny prism child could touch his nose. "We did it. All of us. But mostly him." He paused, then added with a smile, "and a very brave girl who saw a friend where everyone else saw a monster." "What happens now?" Lena asked. Felix considered the question, watching the unprecedented gathering before them. "Now we build something new. A galaxy where understanding matters more than fear, where difference is celebrated rather than feared." Kelor's voice reached them across the hall, speaking to a group of young delegates. "The universe is vast enough for all of us to find our place in it. The key is remembering that every being you meet has a story, a history, a heart that can be touched by kindness." As the celebration continued late into the station's night cycle, Felix reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a simple security breach, a girl wandering into a restricted area. But sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of courage. Looking around at the diverse crowd, humans laughing with crystalline entities, cloud beings sharing songs with star dragons, children of a dozen species playing together without a thought for their differences, Felix knew that they had accomplished something truly remarkable. They hadn't just freed one prisoner, they had helped free an entire galaxy from the prison of its own prejudices. And in doing so, they had proven that even the most unlikely friendships could change the course of history. As the evening wound down and guests began to return to their ships, Felix found himself standing once again at the observation deck. Kelor had returned to his flight through the rings, but now he wasn't alone. Vex and Lyra flew beside him, along with young beings from a dozen other species who had learned to navigate in space. "They call it the Freedom Flight," Lena said, joining him at the window. "Beings from all over the galaxy come here to learn to fly together." Felix smiled, watching the amazing sight of so many different species moving in harmony through the starlight. "I think Kelor would like that name." "He loves it," Lena assured him. "He says it reminds him that freedom is always better when it's shared." As they watched, the flying group formed a magnificent spiral pattern against the backdrop of the nebula, each being moving in perfect harmony with the others. It was beautiful, peaceful, and full of hope. "Thank you," Felix said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing what the rest of us couldn't. For having the courage to reach out to someone who needed a friend." Lena smiled, that same wise smile she had worn even as a child. "Everyone deserves a friend, Captain Felix. Even dragons. Especially dragons." Outside, the Freedom Flight continued its graceful dance among the stars, a living symbol of what was possible when fear gave way to understanding, when prejudice was replaced by friendship, and when the courage of one small girl could change the fate of the galaxy. The deadliest alien dragon had indeed bowed to a human child, not in defeat, but in recognition of the kindness and understanding she offered. And in that moment, the galaxy had found a